For 2016, Honda has three crossovers for sale in the United States. They have the HR-V, which is what we're taking a look at right here. They have the CR-V, and then they have the Pilot. You can think of the HR-V, the CR-V, and the Pilot in similar terms as the Honda Fit, the Civic, and the Accord. The CR-V and the Civic are relatively closely related in terms of the overall mechanics of the vehicle, and this is based off of the Honda Fit. At a hair over 169 inches long, this is one of the larger entries in this particular segment. This is a few inches longer than some of those other vehicles that we've seen recently, like the Mazda CX-3 or the Chevy Trax. Out back, we have LED tail lamp modules, and stylistically, these do wrap from the tailgate on over to the side of the body. The rear end, again, is very keeping with the rest of the Honda family. We have a relatively short bumper overhang right here, like we do find in most of the subcompacts out there, that helps Honda maximize all the cargo space for the overall size of the vehicle. Instead of sharing engines with the Honda Fit, Honda seems to prefer sharing engines with the next size category up. So this shares engines with the last generation Honda Civic, and the Honda CR-V shares engines with the Honda Accord at this time. This is a 1.8-liter four-cylinder engine. It produces 141 horsepower and 127 pound-feet of torque. It is available with a 6-speed manual transmission, only in front-wheel drive and only in the first two trim levels. If you want the all-wheel drive system, you do have to step up to the Honda CVT or continuously variable transmission. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to have to give this 7 out of 10 points. It does depend on your body shape a little bit, and for my body shape, these seats could have been a little bit more comfortable. Now, we do have a tilt telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, but instead of a multi-way adjustable power driver's seat, we do have a manual driver's seat and only adjusts in 6 ways, and there's no adjustable lumbar support even in this top-end EXL trim. As you'd expect in a subcompact crossover, we get less room in the back than something like a CR-V or that next size category up. However, the HR-V is one of the larger entries in this segment, and that means that the rear passenger compartment is more accommodating than most of the options. If I sit upright in this rear seat, I have about ½ an inch of headroom, even though our model does have the optional sunroof, and I still have about 2 inches of legroom left there. One of the things that the HR-V shares with the Honda Fit is its innovative floor pan and rear seat arrangement. We get a floor pan that is wider and lower than a lot of the competition, which means you can fit a lot of cargo right back here in the rear seat area. And it has the same rear seat design as we see in the Fit. So you can actually fold this seat bottom cushion up like this to put large cargo in the vehicle, or you can also fold this whole seat incredibly flat and low with the vehicle. That means that we get about 30 to 50% more storage space right back here than you find in many of the competition. Perhaps even more impressive than that, however, you get nearly 3 times the cargo area that you'll find in something like a Mazda CX-3, whether the seats are up or whether the seats are down. Moving over to the doors, you'll actually find a large portion of soft touch plastics, which is a little bit surprising for this segment. The dashboard uses a surprising amount of soft touch plastic as well for a vehicle in this category. This entire tan portion is a soft touch injection molded portion. You can see that it's actually injection molded to look like it's been stitched. We have these 3 large air vents over here on the passenger side. This kind of reminds me of the Audi 5000. And then we have a large touchscreen infotainment and navigation system here in the middle. This is optional, and in our model, it does use the same infotainment and navigation system as the last generation Honda Civic. That is important because even though this does look like it's the current generation system in the current Civic, this actually is the older version, so it doesn't support Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, although it does have built-in navigation software in our particular model. The HR-V uses a floating center console like some other vehicles out there, and this is actually where you'll find things like the 2 USB inputs, the HDMI input, and a 12-volt power outlet. We also have a small storage cubby right there. The steering wheel is this 3-spoke design that's very similar to what we saw in the last generation Honda Civic. We have this sort of honeycomb cutout right here at the bottom, black trim strip that runs right along there. You'll find dedicated phone hang-up, pickup, and voice command buttons right over here on the left side of the steering wheel. Rather unfortunately, the first thing you'll notice about the HR-V out on the road is how slow this vehicle is. We ran from 0 to 60 in 9.5 seconds, which makes us among the slowest in this segment. In fact, the only other option in this segment that is this slow is the Chevy Trax, and it just about ties with the HR-V. You should also know that if you opt for the manual transmission instead of the CVT, it's going to be even slower 0 to 60. When it comes to braking, this scored very well. We ran from 60 to 0 in 123 feet, which means this actually stops a little bit shorter than something like a Honda Accord. This has a relatively quick steering ratio, which means that we don't have to turn the steering wheel too far in order to get the front wheels to turn. That makes it feel a little bit sportier than some of the entries in this segment. I'd actually say the steering feel is somewhat comparable to the Mazda CX-3. Now, the CX-3 does give us a little bit more road feedback, so you can feel what the front tires are doing just a little bit better in that Mazda, but it's more comparable than you might think. Even though the HR-V uses fairly typical crossover tires, the amount of grip in this vehicle is impressive. Now we do get a decent amount of body roll when we really start seesawing the steering wheel out on these winding mountain roads, but the chassis actually clings to the road very, very well. This feels sort of like a slightly overweight Honda Fit, because it really is sort of a slightly overweight Honda Fit. The HR-V does sit one notch below the Mazda CX-3 and the Nissan Juke when it comes to handling, but that's actually very good company to sit with in this segment. Ride and handling tend to be two ends of the teeter-totter, but this vehicle is very well balanced. The ride is not quite as firm as we see in the Mazda CX-3 or in the Nissan Juke, and that's why this gives up a little bit of handling to those other options. That said, however, it is important to keep in mind that this suspension is still firmer than something like a CR-V, and the vehicle is smaller overall, so we have a shorter wheelbase, etc. That means that you're going to feel washboard pavement bumps in the road more directly in this cabin than you will see in the CR-V. Thanks to the CVT, fuel economy has been fairly good in the HR-V. We've been averaging about 28 miles per gallon in mixed driving. That's just about what the EPA says you should get when you have the CVT and the all-wheel drive system in this vehicle. However, you will get better fuel economy in my driving in the Mazda CX-3. Got to actually about 2 to 3 miles per gallon better overall. Now let's talk about the two toughest competitors. We have the Kia Soul and we have the Mazda CX-3. The Mazda CX-3 is frankly gorgeous. It's the best looking vehicle in this segment by far in my mind. And even though I do find this design attractive, it definitely is not quite as pretty as the CX-3. Now on the downside, that pretty design means it's less practical than the HR-V. We get about 3 times the kind of interior cargo volume in this than we see over there in the CX-3. We get over twice the amount of cargo when the rear seats are in place, about 3 times when you put the seats down. Styling does have an impact on the CX-3's practicality. This is a little bit larger than the CX-3 overall on the outside, but the styling has a big impact on the interior dimensions and the overall practicality of the vehicle. On the positive side for the Mazda, the handling as well as the fuel economy is going to be higher than we see over here in this Honda. When it comes to the interior, Honda definitely wins over the CX-3 in my book. I like the style of the Mazda, but I actually prefer the materials quality in the Honda enough that tips the balance in this vehicle's favor. Most surprising in the HR-V is that even in the base models, the door trims, the center console trim, etc., they're all soft touch materials. And that large expanse of the dashboard is soft to the touch, even though the upper portion of the dashboard right here is hard. It helps give it a more premium feel on the inside. When it comes to performance and handling, as you'd expect from Mazda, it does best the Honda. The biggest thing, of course, for the Honda is the acceleration. The handling feel is quite good and quite comparable to the Mazda CX-3 in reality. However, we get considerably less power under the hood, and of course we have that CVT. As I said before, the Kia Soul is a sort of competitor because it's not really a crossover. We don't have crossover-like ground clearance. We also don't have all-wheel drive available. However, it is very boxy and it's just about the same size as this vehicle overall. And it's the only vehicle in this competitive set that we've been talking about that has cargo capacities and rear seat room similar to the HR-V. We actually get slightly more rear headroom, slightly more rear legroom depending on how you have the seats adjusted, and just about the same cargo room in that Soul as we see in this vehicle. The Kia starts less expensive than the Honda, and that is obvious when we take a look at the inside of this Honda versus the Kia. This has a slightly nicer interior feel to some portions of the dashboard than we see in most versions of the Kia Soul. However, Kia does something unusual with that model, and they actually swap out portions of the interior as you climb that grade ladder. So when you get the top-end version of the Kia Soul versus the bottom-end version of the Kia Soul, you actually get more soft-touch plastics on the dashboard, on the doors, etc. than you find in the base model. Basically, all of the HR-V models have very similar interior trappings. They just swap in leather or pleather instead of the fabric that we see in the base model. The Kia Soul with the base engine is going to be just about as slow as the HR-V, but the next trim level up does get the larger engine, and it is notably faster than the model that we've been driving right here. Again, keep in mind, all-wheel drive is not available over there in the Kia. The Kia Soul obviously wins on pricing. It is going to be less expensive than a comparable HR-V. We get a few electronic gadgets and gizmos in that cabin available that you won't find in this particular vehicle. For instance, if you want things like ventilated and heated seats, you'll find those over there in the Kia. You won't find them over here in the Honda. We also have a large 8-inch infotainment screen that you won't find in this model either. My bottom line with the HR-V is that this ends up being second in this segment for me. I do like the way the package is put together, and I think it could be first if it only had more power under the hood. If Honda figured out a way to jam the new 1.5-liter turbocharged engine from the current Civic under this hood, I suspect this might be my top pick. At the moment, however, the CX-3 is just more attractive to me. It's more attractive overall, it handles a little bit better, it's a little bit sharper feeling. The acceleration is definitely better, and personally, I'm willing to give up the better interior that we see in this vehicle and the bigger cargo area that we see in this vehicle in order to get the better looks and the better acceleration in the CX-3. I also think that the Kia Soul is a good option if you're looking in this segment for a front-wheel drive vehicle. I'm willing to trade the lower fuel economy that we see in the Kia Soul for its slightly improved rear passenger area, the slightly nicer interior, and of course the better acceleration. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes with thetruthaboutcars.com. Go ahead and click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see you next week.